Shalom, welcome to the Jewish Task Force JTF. My name is Chaim Ben Pesach. On this program we're going to discuss the very first bombing in the 1980s world-famous campaign of the Jewish Defense League, the JDL, which I led, to free over 1 million Soviet Jews. But before we get to that historic event and the fascinating circumstances surrounding it, the times you see on the air are for QPTV people. Those are the times we're on during the evenings for QPTV, and those are the times we're on the air during the day for QPTV. And this is our great forum. Soviet Jews were not getting out of Russia. And the reason was obvious. The Russians didn't want to lose their scientists, their engineers, their brains, because the Soviet Jews were the brains of Russia. And so we had to hurt Soviet-American relations and create a big issue out of this in order to force the Soviets to let the Jews out. Otherwise, to this day, the Jews never would have gotten out, and it would have been the end, God forbid, of Soviet Jewry. And so we decided we're going to begin a bombing campaign. Rabbi Meir Kahana, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha Hashem Yikom Damo, whose picture you see behind me, put me in charge, appointed me to the Jewish Defense League to be national chairman of the Jewish Defense League, and told me, Chaim, we've got to lead this campaign to free Soviet Jews. This is our last window of opportunity. It's our last historic chance to save the Jews before it's too late. And so we started our campaign after I had built up somewhat of a structure. On February 23rd, 1984 was the first historic event. We decided that we were going to blow up Soviet diplomatic cars, the fancy, expensive Soviet diplomatic cars, at the Soviet diplomatic complex in the Riverdale section of the Bronx in New York. There was a problem, though. The FBI purchased a house, a private house, that blocked off the Soviet diplomatic complex's parking lot where the cars were parked. The FBI had a house there. And they had a house there for two purposes. One was to protect Soviet diplomats from anybody who would want to do anything to them. And the second reason was they also wanted to keep surveillance on them because the Soviet diplomats were KGB spies. All the Soviet diplomats were KGB spies. I mean, that was a well-known fact. The Russian diplomats in America today are all KGB spies. So there was an FBI house there blocking us from getting to these Soviet cars. We wanted to be able to get to the Soviet cars, but the Soviet parking lot at the Soviet diplomatic complex was protected by this house. The FBI house was between the street and the Soviet parking lot was this FBI house. So what are we going to do? We go in the middle of the FBI. We can't go on the middle of the FBI house. We'll get arrested right away. And the FBI did leave in the evenings. They did not stay there 24 hours a day. But they had surveillance. They had surveillance equipment. They had cameras and surveillance equipment there 24 hours a day. So we decided to do the following. We decided that we were going to go on the FBI house, use the FBI house to go to the Soviet parking lot and to climb over the fence after we go through the garden on the FBI house, walk through the lawn in the garden. We were then going to climb over the fence and then put our bombs on the fanciest Soviet diplomatic cars that we could find in the Soviet parking lot. That was our plan. And we knew, though, that the Soviets, we were going to do it in the middle of the night, because we knew the FBI wasn't there in the middle of the night. They left. They would leave in the evenings, at night. And so we were going to do it in the middle of the night. Now, the problem is, what about the cameras and the surveillance? So what we decided to do is we completely covered ourselves. We had face masks, hand masks, everything. We were completely covered from head to toe. So the cameras did pick up the images of us going there with the bombs and climbing over the fence and putting the bombs on the Soviet diplomatic cars. The cameras did pick up those images. But the images were worthless because they were just images of people that were completely covered up with masks and completely covered from head to toe, so they were worthless. They didn't do anything for the FBI. And so on the night of the attack, we did go there. We went on the lawn of the Soviet diplomatic, we went on the lawn of the FBI house. Then we climbed over the fence. We put the bombs on two very fancy Soviet diplomatic cars that were worth a lot of money. They were very expensive, brand new Soviet diplomatic cars. And the bombs were timed devices, so we just left the bombs there. They were timed to go off later. And then we left, got back in the car and left. And when the bombs went off, they not only caused a big explosion that destroyed both of those Soviet diplomatic cars that we put the bombs on 2 different cars. Not only did they completely destroy both Soviet diplomatic cars, but the gas tanks in the cars blew up, and it caused a big fire. The news media immediately found out that there was a bombing there. They immediately found out. The Soviets, of course, called the FBI and notified them that they had been bombed. And the media immediately found out about it. The media zoomed down there, rushed. I mean, this was in the middle of the Cold War. Soviets, Americans, the atmosphere there, and here we're going and bombing them in the middle of their diplomatic parking lot with an FBI house right next to them. And here we are boldly going on the FBI house and bombing and blowing their cars up. I mean, this was bold. And it was very embarrassing to the FBI. And so we went and did this. And meanwhile, there was a big fire in the parking lot, and the news media cameras are there. They're through the fence. They're taking pictures, and the cameras are there. The firemen come and say to the Soviets, "Open up the fence so we can go in and put out the fires." And the Soviets said, "You will not come in here. This is private diplomatic property. We take care of own problem by ourselves. You don't come in here to put out fire. We put out own fire. If you stupid Americans knew what you are doing, this would never have happened in first place. It's because you Americans are stupid. This is why this happened in first place." That's what they said to the firemen, to the Irish-American firemen, these great Irish-American firemen that showed up. I love the firemen, and the Irish, especially the old-time Irish, they were great. So these great Irish-American firemen show up, and when they said "stupid Americans" and started insulting America, the Irish-American firemen, who were of course patriots and most of them are ex-veterans, were insulted by that. So they said, "Oh, okay. You don't want to, all right, no problem," with the New York accent. "All right, no problem. You don't want to open the door. You don't want to open the fence to let us in. We got to do our job anyway. We get paid by the city to do our job. You don't want to open? No problem. We're going to put out the fire through the fence. Through the fence. We're going to use the fire hose. Bring the fire hose over here, Timmy. We're going to use the fire hose and do." So they use the fire hose through the fence. They use the fire hose and they wet all the Soviet diplomats that were in the parking lot got drenched by the fire hose. These Irish firemen deliberately drenched these Soviet diplomats because the Soviet diplomats said there's a bunch of stupid Americans and they were offended. They drenched them. And the media and the cameras covered this. The Soviets were drenched with water from American firemen. An FBI house was used by JDL activists to blow up Soviet diplomat cars. I mean, this became a big international incident. It was the entire front page the next day of the New York Post, the entire front page of the New York Daily News, the entire front page of Newsday. It was a story with reverberations all over the country and all over the world, and it did hurt Soviet diplomatic relations. The Soviets immediately went to the United Nations UN host committee and accused the Americans of connivance and collaboration with Zionist hooligans. They use FBI house. Firemen come, attack Soviet diplomats. The Amerikanskis there. This is connivance and collaboration with Zionist JDL hooligans. And so it became a big diplomatic incident. Soviet-American relations were damaged, and it was an incident that was very painful and problematic. And the issue of Soviet Jewry was once again on the front pages of the newspapers, and people once again were aware that this issue existed, and that Jews were not going to be silent like they were during the Holocaust when 6 million innocent Jews were murdered and American Jews did nothing to save them. And during over 50 years of Soviet Jewish persecution, Jews did nothing to save them. Those days of silence were over. The message got out, and this was just the opening shot. This was just one out of many. It was the first out of many in a miraculous, breathtaking, incredible JDL campaign that really this should be the subject of movies in Hollywood if we didn't have all these self-hating Jews in Hollywood. This was an incredible campaign where a little organization of underfunded Jews wound up humbling an empire and liberating over 1 million of their brothers and sisters. We're going to give you the details of the other attacks that we made until we broke open the Iron Gate and the Iron Curtain and liberated our brothers and sisters. Shalom.